Transportation Committee told me in 2004. If New Yorkers lived at the typical American sprawl density of 3 households per residential acre, they would require many times as much land. They'd be driving cars, and they'd have huge lawns and be using pesticides and fertilizers on them, and then they'd be overwatering their lawns so that runoff would go into streams. The key to New York's relative environmental benignity is its extreme compactness. Charles Kamenoff, a New York City economist, environmental activist, and bicycling enthusiast, told me, "New Yorkers trade the supposed convenience of the automobile for the true convenience of proximity. They are able to live without the ecological disaster of cars, which is caused not just by having to use a car for practically every trip, but also by the distance that you have to traverse. Bicycling, transit, and walking support each other because they are all made possible by population density. Manhattan's density is approximately 67,000 people per square mile, or more than 800 times that of the nation as a whole, and roughly 30 times that of Los Angeles. Placing 1.5 million people on a 23-square-mile island sharply reduces their opportunities to be wasteful, enables most of them to get by without owning cars, encourages them to keep their families small, and forces the majority to live in some of the most inherently energy-efficient residential structures in the world, apartment buildings. It also frees huge tracts of land for the rest of America to sprawl into. My wife, whose name is Ann Hodgman, and I had our first child, Laura, in 1984. Ann and I had grown up in suburbs, and we decided that we didn't want to raise Laura in a huge city. A couple of months after she learned to walk, we moved to a small town in the northwest corner of Connecticut, about 90 miles north of Midtown Manhattan. Our house was built in the late 1700s. During a rainstorm one night soon after we moved in, I stuck my head into the attic and ran a flashlight over the underside of the roof. The decking boards had been made 200 years before from the broad trunks of old-growth American chestnut trees, a species that was wiped out by an imported blight in the first half of the 20th century, and some of them were almost as broad as sheets of plywood. The rafters, which were hand-hewn, were joined not by iron nails, but by wooden pegs. Carved near the ends of some of the rafters were large Roman numerals, which had been placed there as assembly aids by the anonymous 18th-century builder. The house is across a dirt road from a nature preserve and is shaded by tall white pine trees. And after the storm had ended, I could hear a swollen creek rushing past at the bottom of the hill. Deer, wild turkeys, and the occasional black bear feed themselves in our yard, and wildflowers grow everywhere. From the end of our driveway, I can walk several miles through woods to an abandoned 19th-century railway tunnel, while crossing only one paved road. Yet our move was an ecological catastrophe. Our consumption of electricity went from roughly 4,000 kilowatt-hours a year toward the end of our time in New York to almost 30,000 kilowatt-hours, and our house doesn't even have central air conditioning. We bought a car shortly before we moved, and another one soon after we arrived, and a third one 10 years later. If you live in the country and don't have a second car, you can't retrieve your first car from the mechanic after it's been repaired. The third car was the product of a mild midlife crisis. It evolved into a necessity as soon as Laura and our son John became old enough to drive. Ann and I both work at home and therefore commute by climbing a flight of stairs, but between us we managed to drive more than 20,000 miles a year, mostly doing ordinary errands. City dwellers who fantasize about living in the country usually picture themselves hiking, kayaking, gathering eggs from their own chickens, and engaging in other robust outdoor activities. But what you actually do when you move out of the city is move into a car, because public transit is non-existent and most daily destinations are too widely separated to make walking or bicycling plausible as forms of transportation. Almost everything Ann and I do away from our house requires a car trip. The nearest movie theater is